good to have your company. I'm David Foster. You might think that fewer people on our crowded planet would be a good thing. But with population growth crashing, it means we'll have to think again about how we live. This is Roundtable. Researchers have said that all of this has what they call jaw-dropping implications. Some countries could apparently see their populations more than half by the end of the century. And to keep societies going, mass migration is a real possibility.
Understanding future population patterns is crucial for planning the way societies are run, from the economy to healthcare to public services. We often hear about overcrowded cities, housing problems and overpopulation. But a recent study has found that fertility rates are shrinking faster than thought, leading to a possible population crash in many countries. According to the report, 23 nations including Spain and Japan are expected to see their populations halve by the year 2100. Rates are dropping in developed and developing countries, making it a global issue. 183 out of 195 countries have a fertility rate below the replacement level. The drop in birth rates is driven by women in education and work and wider access to contraception. It's been argued that a shrinking world population could be good for the environment and climate change. But others disagree, pointing to the problems caused by having more older people than young people, like falling tax revenues, rising costs of health and social care, and a shrinking workforce. Is the drop in birth rate going to be a problem, and how will it impact the way we live in the future?
Well, I'm delighted to say that joining us from Kentucky in the USA, we have Lyman Stone, Chief Information Officer at Demographic Intelligence. We travelled to Oxford in the United Kingdom to welcome David Coleman, Emeritus Professor of Demography at Oxford University, and then to Vienna, where we say hello to Wolfgang Fengler, World Bank lead economist for Southern Africa. Great to have all three of you on the programme. Wolfgang, let me come to you first of all. Jaw-dropping is what the researchers have said. You describe this as a huge challenge for humanity. Why?
It is a huge challenge because it will be a new world that we're entering, a world where more and more people will worry about too few people and not too many. And somehow that sight of peak humanity is coming in some ways, and not maybe in our lifetime, but in our children's lifetime. And somehow it's the second fundamental research now that has come out that has confirmed the sense that population growth is slowing down, and that many countries, including my home country, Germany, are grappling with declining and shrinking populations. And that's a challenge, a manageable challenge, I hope, but one that is very new to humanity because it hasn't happened at that magnitude yet.
What sort of challenges in particular does it throw up?
Well, the most topical that goes to the UK, many European countries, many wealthier countries, is a pension system and a society where there's fewer and fewer children, which may still actually mean that children are more treasured, and all of us who have children, I think treasure them as much as possible. But somehow that treasure is somehow more, will be fewer and hopefully cherished even more going forward. But I think one way is pretty clear, as even though population will decline eventually, or possibly again 2070, even the best demographers don't fully know what will happen then. But assuming it is declining, it means there is fewer but at the same time, it is many more older people. And so a retirement system that sends people into pension at age 60, it's partially done in Austria, is impossible. If people live till 100, it won't be. So what one needs to do is to rethink this. And we should start thinking of life counting from death. So the last 15 years, you should get a pension, but the rest of counting, we should adjust.
It'll be very difficult to know when somebody's exactly going to die and to be able to count back. But that's another issue. You talk about world-leading demographers, which leads me to David Coleman. Jaw-dropping, as I referenced at the beginning, is how the researchers describe it. You don't necessarily see it as such.
Well, it's jaw-dropping in its implications, as we just heard. It's also jaw-dropping in a slightly less favorable way, in the sense that some of the assumptions built into this projection are very questionable. Now, all population projections are always wrong. We have to face that. What matters is how wrong they are and why they're wrong. And while I welcome actually a number of the developments foreseen in these projections, I think that some of the underpinnings of the projections are questionable.
Okay, we'll start with what you welcome and then tell me what you think is wrong.
Well, I welcome in general the notion that world population growth will cease earlier than is expected, and that world population will start to decline almost everywhere. This is, I think, is necessary and inevitable if we're going to survive. I'm not an ecological maniac, but continued population growth is not feasible, and the sooner it comes to an end, the better, from the point of view of not just resources, but also from the point of view of the quality of life for many people, particularly in the more crowded parts of the world, in which I would include the United Kingdom.
Well, we can go into that in some detail in just a moment. I'll come back to you and ask you what you think is wrong with the assumptions that have been made. But let's bring in Lyman at this particular point. I don't know whether you agree with the assertions that are being made, whether you're worried or not. Give us your point of view.
Definitely the recent fertility forecast that we've seen, they represent a scenario. Reality will come in differently than that, as was mentioned. I'm less sanguine about population decline. Pensions were mentioned, but pensions are fixable. You can always raise tax rates or tweak benefit ratios, but there are deeper problems. Anyone who's tried to sell a home in a community that's shrinking knows that the value of that asset declines. If everyone in the world faces a situation where their home has a declining value, that's a huge amount of potential leverage that's gone, that normally would be used to smooth consumption, to finance startup capital in a small business. We're talking about a fundamentally less dynamic economy. With more old people and fewer young people, bequests will be a larger share of wealth. More of the wealthy in the world will be inherited and fewer will be earned. I don't know that that's a good situation. With a slower growing market, we'll see existing companies claim a larger and larger share as startups won't be able to seize sort of a new growth in consumption. Will all be competing for existing customers. Ultimately, what we'll see is a less dynamic economy on all fronts. This is not going to be higher quality of life. It's not like as population declines that we'll all get to have a larger share of the same pie. The pie will shrink. There's actually abundant economic research on this, exploiting variation in exogenous shocks to population growth in a variety of settings that finds pretty consistently declining population growth is one of the leading drivers of the declining economic dynamism that we're seeing around the developed world. So regardless of sort of the balance sheets of pension math or long-term accounting and anything like that, we're going to be fewer and poorer.
Let's take a look at perhaps why this is happening. I'll give you some figures first. 1950, these are fertility rates, live births per woman. 1950, 4.5. 2017, just recently, 2.4. 2100, 1.7. Population levels estimated on those figures, based on those figures, by 2100. Japan, population in 2017 of 128 million to less than 53 million. Italy, 61 million to 28 million. David, why do you think birth rates are falling? Because I think the figure is, if it's below 2.1 and they're projecting 1.7, then population levels go down. Why do you think that's happening?
I don't necessarily think that birth rates will continue to decline in the way which we've been discussing. This particular set of projections assumes a rather rigid relationship between education and fertility decline, and also assumes that trajectories of fertility decline set in place at the beginning of the projection will continue right to the end of the century. And this is profoundly implausible. There are reasons why birth rates may go up as well as down. They have in the past. In Britain, the birth rate was equivalent to 1.6 children per woman back in 1935. It was 1.6 children per woman in 1970, and it's about 1.6 now. There's no reason to suppose it's going to get stuck at that. But I do generally agree that population decline brings problems. Any rapid population change brings problems, whether it's growth or decline, and so slowly is a safe way forward. I wouldn't argue with the general economic propositions being put forward, but to a large extent they are inevitable. I don't see how it's possible to avoid a slowdown in population. I don't think it's possible to imagine that people are going to want to have much more than 2 children under the most favorable circumstances. My Viennese colleagues in the Wittgenstein Institute, Wolfgang Lutz and others, reckon that the optimum birth rate for welfare is at equivalent to about 1.8 children, which of course brings in its train population aging and eventual population decline. But it will be slow decline, nothing dramatic and remarkable. I think one of the problems with the scenarios that we're discussing is that they are rather extreme and very abrupt.
Okay, we'll come back to some of the reasons why perhaps women are choosing to have fewer children, not perhaps in Britain at this particular point, but also in other countries as well. But Wolfgang, let me come to you. You cover particularly Southern Africa. It's not the case necessarily there that women are staying in education longer, that they're delaying having families, that they decide they are not going to have fewer offspring. So what is going to happen to the balance of population around the world, in heavily populated African countries and in the so-called developed world? What's the shift in population likely to be?
Well, David, the biggest shift we'll see, and I think nobody doubts it, that Africa's population growth is still rising, and we'll see a shift in terms of total numbers towards Africa and with a much slighter way towards Asia. But I think we need to also highlight one fundamental point, or 2 points we have been discussing. One is this rapid population decline. We're talking about 2070. Even in the best possible scenarios, we are not around anymore by then. And there's, as David just said, there is many other scenarios and possibilities that it can happen that population growth may not slow down as dramatically by then. Till 2050, or even a bit after, the gap is not as dramatic in the various projections, including from the UN. The reason, though, and that's, I think, is very fundamental, population growth is happening despite declining fertility. Fertility can go down and population growth still go up. Why? Because people live longer. And when they live longer, there's more people. And when there's everybody living till 100, which our children will likely do, then you get a lot more people. And so that's why Asia is still growing in population despite much lower fertility. Bangladesh at 2 people per family, China already way below. So those dynamics are important because that will still shape the world the next 2-3 decades. Even in Africa, if you take the big numbers, Asia is a billion children now. It will go down by 10% the next 10 years. Africa is at 550 roughly and will go up 10%. So even in Africa, it's not a dramatic explosion of children, but it is life expectancy drivers that will shape the next decade. And that's a big opportunity. It's a big challenge as well. But South Africa, a country I cover, doesn't have high unemployment because there's too many people. It has the same number of children than Japan. Japan has 100 million adults, South Africa only 40 million. So more adults for South Africa would in balance be a good thing, but lots of other things need to happen to then make it the demographic opportunity that we are covering.
You are all free to say anything anytime you want, but I'm just trying to sort of move it around a little bit. And I was going to throw this one at you, Wolfgang, but I want to bring Lyman back in. If a country sees its population declining considerably, we mentioned Italy, we talk about, I think Korea is one of the other countries. If it sees its population and its workforce going down, it's going to have to bring in workers to fill the void from elsewhere. So we are going to see mass migration perhaps with this. Would you agree?
So certainly there's, as the working age population declines, you get demand for workers, which leads to demand for immigration. So we see countries like Korea and Japan are beginning to open up to migrants. And that'll occur in more and more countries. It's not going to work, though, because as more and more countries have aging populations, they will all be competing with each other for the pool of migrants, even as birth rates are falling in countries that might send migrants. So in the long run, this strategy, it can work as a stopgap for a while. I support very liberalized immigration policies, but it's only a stopgap. And the reason is that the population decline in the working age population is much more aggressive than total population. I appreciate what was said about life expectancy, and I appreciate what was said about that a very gradual population decline may be less damaging. But it's important to understand that a gradual population decline, because falling fertility is offset by rising life expectancy, may nonetheless be an extremely aggressive decline in the working age population. So we already see this, for example, in China, where the total population is experiencing a somewhat gradual decline, but the working age population is plummeting. And of course, of interest to Chinese strategic planners, the military recruitable age population is declining even faster. So this is important for economic production. This is important for the life that we share together. This is important for what our society is going to look like and what it's going to feel like to live there. So I don't think we can just say, well, total population is just declining at a very low rate. No one experiences total population. You experience your children's friend group at school. You experience your peer cohort. You experience how many older people you have to take care of in your life. So you can see this in Japan, Asia, Korea, where you have the 4-2-1 problem, where there's 4 grandparents, 2 children, and 1 grandchild. And ultimately, that 1 grandchild is going to have a lot of burden on them. It may be a gradual population decline, but it's a very sudden cultural change.
I'm interested, David Coleman, that you said this sort of thing is not unnatural. It has happened before. Do you care to give examples of where we've seen societies needing to bring in huge amounts of workers because they haven't been able to produce them themselves because they're expanding economically at a far faster rate than expected, et cetera, et cetera?
Well, I didn't imply that there were larger importations of workers in the cases that I was mentioning. In fact, I think that in many respects, certainly in socio-cultural terms, large-scale migration is very difficult to manage and is environmentally damaging when it increases populations of rich and crowded countries. But if I can switch a bit, can I say first of all that one of the reasons why populations grow when birth rates are low is demographic momentum. Lots of countries which have got sub-replacement birth rates have been growing because the age structure has been maturing and bringing more women into reproductive ages inherited from the past. It is indeed the reduction in death rates which matters. It's also population momentum. That eventually runs out of steam, and it's running out of steam in many European countries now, if it hasn't run out of steam already. The next point I'd like to make, if I'm allowed, is that there's a very big debate, which I'm sure my 2 colleagues here are very well aware of, about how many workers you're actually going to need. The notion that if a production needs to be maintained and services need to be provided, they have to be done by people is surely quite obsolete. The Japanese are making remarkable progress in developing mechanisms and AI which can deal with a depressingly wide range of routine jobs. That's opening, I know, a whole new debate, but it is something which we have to take very seriously. That we don't.
Indeed, it's something that we have covered at length on Roundtable, and undoubtedly we will go back to it. Wolfgang, where do you think we're going to be halfway through this century? In other words, are adjustments going to have to be made relatively soon?
Yeah, I think that halfway and soon, and this show will help to change the narrative, right? We're all convinced that the declining population might happen, and the majority in the world is not. I don't think we're running out of jobs as long as not everybody gets the best healthcare in the world, the best education, the best infrastructure. There's enough work to do. The question is, how do you convert work into jobs? The second key thing is, and I think my both colleagues have alluded to this, is the fact that we need to rethink our work. And you're a good example there, David. You don't want to retire at a certain age. You like your job. We all like our jobs. We'll do the job longer. And that's normal, and that's actually a myth that people want to retire early. People and now with technology have more opportunities, and we'll see in the future what somebody will say. Oh, you retire already at 80. That will be some of the new normal. And if that's happening, then we don't need this doomsday scenarios. I like population projections. I know the methodological nuances, but really to be sure that 2070 it will go down, it's not guaranteed. So the only key thing I think that will happen, as you indicated, is that the migration debate may also switch, that it will become from refugee challenge to war for talent on the global scale. But if globally we are hardly growing, it is still net zero sum. And so again, the value of life, I think, will go up. And those countries which are more modern and open will succeed more. But I think one starting point is, I think, as my colleague said just before, fix the pension system and get rid of the 19th century mindset that you have fixed parameters when you start and when you end.
Slightly amused by your suggestion that I'm going to carry on working forever and not be replaced by artificial intelligence. Some people might suggest that a robot has been sitting here for the last 3 years, but I will leave that to you. And I want to throw something out there. We've got about 5 minutes left in the program. Chris Murray, one of the report's co-authors, he wrote, if you can't find a solution, then eventually the species disappears. But that's a few centuries away. David, let me come to you first with your thoughts on that. You and I aren't going to be around forever and ever, but neither's anybody else if we don't sort this out, he says.
It would be an awful large number of centuries, I think, before the world's population became extinct. Even the population of Japan, which has been declining for some time, has centuries to run before the last Japanese pops his clogs. It seems to me that there are feedbacks here, negative and positive feedbacks, and one of the things we haven't really thought very much about is the way in which birth rates may interact with population size. I take the point that's been made by my colleagues here that all kinds of problems can arise with a declining population. Nonetheless, if a population becomes smaller, opportunities for individuals can become bigger once things are stabilized, and it may become much easier to form families, acquire housing, enjoy a more relaxed and open life with fewer people than there were before, not the least because people will become more valuable. And there's actually a very good global example of this. One of the most remarkable economic events and demographic events was, of course, the Black Death, which killed off about a third of the population of Europe and most of the rest of the world as well. And that is generally regarded as having unleashed not a golden age, but certainly a
wave of creativity. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I'm going to have to hurry it along just a little bit. Lyman, your thoughts? We're not going to be around as a species forever unless we fix this.
We are 4 men debating having babies. I think it doesn't really matter in the long run if there's 10 billion people or 1 billion people. What matters is if people are having the family life that they want, and particularly if they're able to enjoy the society and culture that they want. And that might sometimes involve people who are not men. And what I would say is that when you look around the world, you look at surveys, particularly of women, the vast majority of women in almost every country want to have somewhere between 2 and 4 children. And it doesn't matter how you word the survey.
I'm going to hurry you up here because I also noted that you said we may have to pay women to have children.
It's not that we have to pay, it's that there are social obstacles to having children. We've created child unfriendly and family unfriendly societies. So we should compensate for that. People should be able to have the families that they want, and we all depend on our neighbors having the families that they want to have to pay for our retirement. So yes, I believe that we should absolutely compensate families for the important and valuable task of raising children.
Yes, and those countries which have succeeded in making their societies and economies and welfare systems most child-friendly are the ones which have been rewarded with the highest birth rates. I'm thinking of Scandinavia, France, to some extent, in a more sloppy way, Britain.
Wolfgang, will humanity survive this?
One, David, I guess we'll find humanity on outer space before we get extinct. So that's one solution. But on a more serious note, and speakers just alluded to this, economics will change it. Once you get these pressures you outlined, people will have more children because the incentives and the environment will change. And that's why I think 2100 projections will inevitably change as well. I have 3 children, and if everybody follows my example, we'll be fine.
Okay, and do you think it will be sorted out pretty soon?
No, it will be sorted out by 2050, but till then we have on balance, things will go in the right direction.
Okay, listen, I want to say thank you very much indeed to each and every one of you. Fascinating to hear your thoughts about what might happen in the next 50 or 100 years and the fact that humanity will probably work out a way to get around it. I personally agree with you. I think as soon as we find ourselves doing something that perhaps leads to our possible extinction, we become incredibly selfish and work out how not to become extinct all the time, letting other things on our planet disappear forever. But that's for another program. I appreciate your time. Thank you very much indeed, Lyman. Thank you, David. Thank you, Wolfgang. And thank you very much wherever you happen to be watching this edition of Roundtable. We will be back with another episode very soon. From me, David Foster, and all those people who helped put this show together, thank you for watching. We hope to have your company next time. Goodbye.